Hello and welcome back, and today I want to show you guys a little bit of performance testing utilizing Wi-Fi 6 and your PS5, but a few disclaimers straight off the bat. First and foremost, this is going to be utilizing a PS5 and an Asus RT-AXU Wi-Fi 6 router, but it is behind a ISP router. That's going to be very important, as I talk about later in the video. Also, it's worth highlighting that I'm not recording this in the usual studio. I'm recording this from someone's house, and therefore the sound quality is incredibly difficult to stay on top of. So I apologize in advance if the sound quality is a little bit, bassy there in the background. But first and foremost, let's talk about Wi-Fi 6. Let's talk about the test, and we'll talk about how we're going to do this. Now, it's important to understand when we talk about Wi-Fi 6, to understand network, kind of network peripheral devices and where things sit in the network. So if we go into the network settings of our PS5, we can see the internet connection there has failed. And the reason is I've been playing with some of these network settings. So if we go for the test network configuration there, we're going to let the PlayStation start testing the network environment. Now, the first thing you may see there on screen is the fact that this is a Wi-Fi 6 router. Now, we're going to be doing 3 different tests today. We're going to be testing Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 5, and we're going to be using LAN, or Ethernet cable. But it's worth understanding there are going to be limitations. Now, the reason we're rerunning this test is because a lot of you, when you do test your PlayStation 5 or even previous generation, will rely on the PlayStation's internet connection testing that's built in there. As you can see, it's rated 81.9 megabits per second. And with the upload, that will be less. That'll probably be somewhere between 5 and 10. But it's worth remembering that the tests you're seeing here on screen aren't typical speed tests. These are tests communicating with the PlayStation's own network service, PSN. The result is that although they are good for testing communication with the main server, which you'll probably be doing in a number of ways with a lot of dedicated games, or for downloading games, it's worth remembering that a lot of games these days use private servers, or they use their own third-party servers, and therefore this test isn't really that useful for testing the ability of Wi-Fi 6 on a PS5. And the way we're going to go about doing it is using a little bit of a workaround, which I'll talk about later in the video. But before we go any further, let's make our way back into that. So we'll look at the connection status. We've got all the information there telling us about it. It's worth remembering the difference between utilizing your ISP router, which is your internet service provider router, and using a Wi-Fi 6 router, because although Wi-Fi 6 has now been publicly available for at least a couple of years, internet service providers very rarely provide Wi-Fi 6 routers because the majority of the world still doesn't have the kind of internet connections in upload and download that can justify Wi-Fi 6. Now, if I flick over on OBS to a quick diagram here, this will give you some idea what I'm talking about. I know this is basic, but just stick with me here. So, on the green line here at the bottom, we've got our internet connection. This is my Virgin connection here. I think it's a 50 megabit connection. But the fact still remains, that connection there only goes as far as my internet service provider router supplied by Virgin. Now, that router needs to be an internet service provider router because of the nature of the cabling. You can buy routers such as this Wi-Fi 6 router here from Asus that can replace your internet service provider router. However, you have to make sure that the cabling being utilized is compatible with this system. A lot of routers, particularly main routers and modems, we'll talk about modems in a moment, do not have the cable connection required to connect to the outside internet connection. Over here, we have the network. Over here, we have the internet. Now, with these devices being connected, that a router can be 2 things, a router and a modem. A router ultimately exchanges and manages the packets of data in, and particularly connected to the internet, around connected devices. It can also be classified as a switch, but that is more network only dedicated. And I'm aware that's a very caveman way to put it, but the fact still remains. Now, a modem is ultimately a management tool, a hardware management tool for the upload and download of data with the wider internet. The result is that although the internet service provider router you've been given, your ISP router from the likes of Virgin, Comcast, any of these companies, when you get that router, it also has the modem built in. So when you get a Wi-Fi 6 router, unless it is a Wi-Fi 6 router that has a physical connection that's compatible with the internet connection, such as, when they come in, when they do an installation, they stick that box on the wall and preset cabling. Unless it has that physical cable connection, you will need to have the Wi-Fi 6 router connected to your internet service provider router. And given that most internet service provider routers don't have Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax wireless connectivity, or they don't have more than 1 GBE LAN connections, it means that your wider internet connection on Wi-Fi 6 will never exceed this number. It simply can't. There's ways around it, taking advantage of link aggregation when you combine multiple connections between the ISP router and the Wi-Fi 6 router, or if you replace devices in the network that are link aggregation supported. But in the case of PS5, it doesn't support link aggregation, and it needs to connect via LAN, which is 1 GBE, or between 100 and 109 megabytes per second, or Wi-Fi 6 and below. So this is the setup that we're going to be utilizing in this test in my environment. The distance between my PS5 and the Wi-Fi 6 router is 6.5 feet, so not too much. And what we're going to be doing during these tests is running all three of these tests: a Wi-Fi 6 connection, a Wi-Fi 5 connection, and finally a wired LAN connection, to see what the difference is between them. The download on the wired and Wi-Fi 6 connection will be pretty similar, certainly better than that of Wi-Fi 5. However, it's the upload that we care the most about, because that's where we're going to get to see the extra few meg where it counts. So now I've explained the tests that we're going to be running and the setup. You may have seen already on screen that I have got the setup of my Wi-Fi 6 router already prepared. So if we switch back to the screen recording here of our PS5, we can see that we're connected to the Asus Wi-Fi, and we should be able to see my credentials there on screen for the Wi-Fi 6 router. So the first test we're going to be conducting is utilizing Wi-Fi 6. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's very hard to show you these performance tests on a console, particularly on a PlayStation 5, where they have removed the web browser tool, presumably because not many people used it, but also simply because most of these applications have got all the data in between them. So how do we get about getting to the browser? Many users have tried to go into settings and go into users and accounts, and from there gone into link other services, and then try to go into the browser this way. Unfortunately, you can't access the URL bar here. You can't change the domain. A great workaround for this that we found on Reddit is as follows. Find one of your friends on the PSN network and send them a simple message that says www.google.com. Send them that as a message. From there, you can then go into the web browser. So as you can see here, I've sent another user the URL www.google.com, and it allows us to get into the web browser. And quite easily, we just type in the word speed test. I've already done it there. And there we go. Lots of speed tests here available to be utilized online. So if we go for the first one here, and there will be the odd pop-up, which will be annoying, we're able, zoom out again, to utilize this test. We can see that it's identified it's a Virgin Media connection and it's connected to Horsham, which isn't too far from here. So what I'm going to do is run now a Wi-Fi 6 performance test. We'll leave that running on screen, and that will begin the testing of this Wi-Fi 6 connection in real time. As you can see, we're heading into the late 80s and 90 megabits per second, and we're just living there at the 80 or 90. Let's try that again, and remember about what I mentioned before about the bottleneck between your internet service provider modem and your Wi-Fi 6 router if you're not able to get a Wi-Fi 6 router that can interface directly with your internet connection. And we can see that test there coming out at 9.9 or so megabits per second upload. And there we go, it gives us some information there about our connection. We can zoom in and find out a little bit more about the test that we've just run. And there's lots more information there. So from here, we can then try this same test again, but this time utilizing traditional Wi-Fi 5. Now, in order to do this, we're going to come out, we're going to leave that there, and from here, we're going to head into the router. On the interface, you should be able to see on screen right now the fact that we can see the settings on our Wi-Fi 6 router. And at the top there, we can see enable 802.11ax mode, otherwise known as Wi-Fi 6. So if we disable that connection, then click apply, it's now going to disconnect us from the network briefly. You can see the Wi-Fi symbol at the top of the phone, which will disappear and then reappear when our internet connection is reactivated. But now this exact same connection on Wi-Fi 6 has now been downgraded to Wi-Fi 5. So that means when we run this test again, you can see there on screen the Wi-Fi connection has been lost, and then it will re-establish the connection with the Wi-Fi. Once that connection is re-established, as it will be any second now, if we come out of this tool and we'll perform the same test we just did to show that the internet connection is reactivated. Once we reconnect to Google upon the reconnection of our internet settings, we can then run the Wi-Fi 5 test. As you can see, we've got our connection to Google back. Once again, we'll enter speed test. It will find the speed test results, but this time we're going to be running a traditional Wi-Fi 5 performance test on exactly the same. Let's go here. We've changed the server, but we don't want that. We want the one that was in Horsham. And now we're going to retest the exact same setup that we just did. Let's try it. Let's get that there on screen and let it run its test. So for now, we're going to be doing the download test. And as you can see, now, because we're using Wi-Fi 5 from the exact same distance, from the exact same router, our connection has notably changed. Now we're going to switch over to the upload speed to give you some idea about this performance. Remember, we're dealing with a distance here of around 2 meters from the original router, with one wall of blockage between the PlayStation 5 and the main router. The upload has gone down from an impressive 9.9 down to around 7.3 to 7.4, but it is climbing. And there you go. There is our Wi-Fi 5 performance benchmark now. So for our final test, we want to now change from the wireless connection and onto the wired connection. So I'm going to quickly disentangle from my setup here and then switch the PlayStation over to a LAN connection. So now I'm going to go ahead and start preparing our wired connection. We can go ahead, connect to the wired connection and switch away from the Wi-Fi 6 connection that we talked about earlier. Now, as you can see, we're now connected via a LAN connection there to the exact same router. We've got the ability to connect to the internet. We've got that LAN connection and it's all ready to go. So for now, let's go back into the messages settings, find our link onto the web browser there. From there, go into messages, once again, go into messages, find our link to Google that we created with our small workaround. we're connected to the internet, and once again, we're going to run the test. Now bear in mind, this should, in theory, max out at 109 megabytes per second. Let's make sure we find the exact same server. We don't want that server there. We want to keep it nice and straightforward. And for now, let's go ahead and restart our test. On a wired connection, of course, things are going to be a great deal faster. As you can see, they're going straight up there. We're still, of course, limited by our internet connection. And of course, the LAN connection between the PlayStation and that of the PlayStation, the Wi-Fi router, wired router, and our modem ISP router. But for now, we can see that we got to that 100 megs with the wired connection, but I've had to run a wire through a wall to get to the router and the PlayStation. As you can see, it's still very, very comparable to that of Wi-Fi 6. I have re-enabled the Wi-Fi 6 connection too on the PlayStation and the router connection for when we do our next test where we end the video. But for now we can see that the wired connection was 100 megabits per second and 9.58 megabits per second upload. So now we're going to come out of that one last time, head back to the screen, go back into settings, and for now we're going to go ahead and re-establish that Wi-Fi 6 connection. We're going to switch back to the Wi-Fi connection, not wired. Connect to there. It's going to re-establish the connection with Wi-Fi 6, and then we're going to run that test one last time. Once again, I apologize for the bassy sound on this video today. I wish I was recording back in the studio, to be honest. We're just going to let that do its checking and re-establish its connection with the Wi-Fi 6 router. As you can see, hopefully on screen throughout this video has been the network settings of our Wi-Fi 6 router from beginning to end, showing when we have or have not used our connectivity. We're showing a failed there. I do get the impression that we need to re-establish the test on that one. So we'll let that run its test. And then we'll do our final Wi-Fi 6 test there in the background. There you go, we're re-establishing it there. It's going to get the PlayStation's own readings on upload and download. Once again, as mentioned earlier in the video, you can utilize these statistics that it gives you, but bear in mind that the performance benchmarks presented to you by PlayStation's own network test connectivity is utilizing PSN and not utilizing the wider internet. So if you were downloading games or you were utilizing it for online play but using a Sony mainline server connected to PSN and not a third-party private server, these might be more reliable, but I wouldn't utilize these as a true benchmark score. Always try to use an independent target there for your testing. We've got 71.0 megabits per second download. Upload should be with us shortly. Remember, the score was in the 80s or late 80s and 90s for Wi-Fi 6 previously. So let's come out of that, and now we're going to head back into the Google test there. And again, it's a real shame that the Google, you can't utilize Google's own speed test. A number of you, if ever you do want to bench test performance on a network connection, one of the beautiful things is just typing in the word speed test into Google, and built into the browser with things like Chrome is a great speed test tool. Unfortunately, you're not able to utilize it on the PlayStation's browser. So once again, we're going to go into here, and it's the final time we're going to do this before we end the video. We'll make sure we're going to use that server in Horsham. Going to go there. We don't want to use Croydon. We're going to use Horsham to make sure it's all level playing field from beginning to end. And for the final test, we're going to go ahead. Actually, let's have a look at the settings first, because we didn't really take the time to look at the settings, did we? There we go. We found out a little bit more information there about our connection. That's about it. That's just telling us settings about our internet connection. Sorry about the delay there, everyone. Let's go ahead and try that. Switch it back to Horsham before we end the video. And let's go ahead and run that test one final time, utilizing zoom in Wi-Fi. It's no good. Utilizing Wi-Fi 6. So again, it's climbing up. It was a bit of a slow start there, it had to be said, but we're still seeing that number in the late 60s. Lovely stuff there, and still infinitely showing a much more improved performance over that of Wi-Fi 5. Of course, it's still not quite there at LAN connectivity, and I think if we were utilizing closer proximity, or if we were to replace the internet service provider router with a Wi-Fi 6 router that can router and modem that can interface with our Virgin connection, it would be a very, very different story. But we're going to let this test end. I'm going to run it one more time as well, because I think rule of 3, you should always run the test 3 times. So let's run it one last time, just for funsies. And we're going to wrap things up now as this does its last test there on screen. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I do talk quite a lot about Wi-Fi 6, and we're still all waiting on the storage upgrades for PlayStation 5, which of course I'll be testing multiple SSDs when that feature is launched on the PlayStation firmware update later in the summer. So when that does come available, maybe hold out a couple of weeks before buying an SSD, because I will be testing a wide array of NVMe PCIe Gen 3 Gen 4 SSDs closer to that time. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Sorry about the sound quality. I hope you still found it useful and interesting. And if you have any thoughts, maybe you're in an area where your internet service provider is dishing out Wi-Fi 6 routers, or you have recommendations of a Wi-Fi 6 router that can interface with a lot of the hardware and cabling that go into people's houses in the UK, US and more, do let everyone know in the comments and let me know directly. Do visit the links in the description about PS5 and Wi-Fi 6 content, and I will see you next time.